During the Great Depression, home security was not about alarms, cameras, or police response times. It was about survival under conditions where law enforcement was thin, desperation was common, and hunger drove otherwise honest people to take risks. Families learned quickly that if they failed to protect their homes, they might not eat, heat their houses, or survive the winter. What follows are 8 home survival security practices from the Great Depression that were widespread, deliberate, and effective, yet rarely discussed today. Families hid valuables in plain sight instead of locking them away. One of the most counterintuitive practices of the era was avoiding obvious hiding places. Safes, lockboxes, and drawers were among the first things searched during thefts. Families instead hid money, documents, and jewelry inside everyday household items that appeared worthless. Flour sacks, false bottoms in coal bins, hollowed books, curtain hems, and even children's toys were common storage locations. The logic was simple. Thieves were in a hurry and targeted places that made sense. Items that required time, mess, or suspicion to search were usually skipped. This approach can still be applied today by storing emergency cash, backup IDs, or digital backups inside objects that blend naturally into daily life rather than concentrating everything in a single secure container. Homes were intentionally made to look poorer than they actually were. Appearances mattered during the Depression. Families who had food stores or savings often went to great lengths to conceal that fact. Curtains were patched instead of replaced. Furniture was kept old even when replacements were possible. Repairs were delayed if they made the home appear newly improved. This was not about shame, it was a defensive measure. Homes that appeared slightly worse off were less likely to be targeted. Desperation follows opportunity, you know? A house that looked like it had nothing to take was often passed over entirely. In modern terms, this translates to avoiding obvious displays of wealth that attract attention. Overly visible deliveries, flashy exterior upgrades, or obvious storage sheds filled with supplies can unintentionally mark a home as a resource target during hard times. Neighborhoods formed informal nighttime watch systems without formal coordination. Formal neighborhood watches did not exist, but communities protected themselves through quiet observation. Someone was always awake. Shift workers, insomniacs, elderly neighbors, and parents tending children naturally formed a loose surveillance network. People noticed unfamiliar footsteps, strange lights, or repeated passers-by. The key detail is that these systems were never announced. There were no schedules, no whistles, no uniforms. That secrecy made them effective. Outsiders never knew who was watching or when. Today, this principle can be applied by maintaining low-key communication with trusted neighbors and being observant without advertising security routines or patrol habits. Back in the day, doors were reinforced internally rather than just relying on those exterior locks. A lot of Depression-era homes had pretty weak locks on the outside, so families would compensate by reinforcing the doors from the inside, you know? At night, heavy furniture was often positioned real strategically. Folks would also install wooden bars or removable braces behind the doors. And to top it off, windows were secured with dowels or custom-cut wooden stops, making sure they couldn't be opened all the way. This approach, well, it accepted an important reality. A lock might slow someone down, but real resistance is what stops them. Even nowadays, internal reinforcement is just more effective than relying only on locks that can be picked, kicked, or forced open. Sometimes, just a simple removable bar, a door brace, or a window stop can really make a big difference, adding resistance without drawing any attention from the outside. Families would control light to signal occupancy and awareness, using it as a sort of communication tool. Homes were rarely ever completely dark at night, even when folks were trying to save on fuel. Usually, a single lamp in the front room would suggest that someone was awake. Sometimes, lights were moved between rooms to create the impression of movement, and if something felt wrong outside, sudden changes in light were used as a warning signal. This practice discouraged intrusion by removing uncertainty. A thief prefers an empty, unaware target. Light implied presence and alertness. In modern settings, timed interior lighting or deliberate light use can still suggest activity and awareness, especially during prolonged absences or late hours. Families learned quickly that food was the primary target during break-ins. As a result, food storage was often kept away from bedrooms. Root cellars, detached sheds, crawl spaces, and concealed pantries reduced the risk of violent confrontations during thefts. This separation meant that if someone entered the home searching for food, they were less likely to encounter the family directly. It also reduced the chance of losing everything at once. Applying this today means decentralizing critical supplies. Avoid storing all food, water, tools, and fuel in one easily accessible location. Children were trained in silence, observation, and warning signals. Children were not shielded from reality during the Depression. They were trained. Young family members were taught to stay silent when needed, to recognize unusual sounds, and to use prearranged signals to alert adults. A knock on a wall, a moved object, or a whispered phrase had meaning. This training was not fear-based, it was practical. Children often noticed changes adults missed. Today, families can apply this by teaching situational awareness, basic emergency behavior, and quiet communication, rather than relying solely on adults to manage every threat. Trust was extended slowly and information was tightly controlled. Perhaps the most overlooked security practice was information discipline. Families did not discuss their food stores, savings, or resources openly, even with friends. Gossip could turn into danger. A casual comment about having extra flour or canned goods could spread quickly. This habit of silence protected families from being targeted by those who were desperate or, even malicious. In modern terms, this translates to being careful about what is shared publicly or online. Talking openly about supplies, preparedness, or assets can unintentionally advertise vulnerability. These Great Depression security methods were developed under real pressure by folks who had no margin for error. They relied on psychology, misdirection, resilience, and community awareness rather than technology. That is precisely why they remain relevant. Modern security often fails when systems go down or when our attention fades. Folks back in the Depression era, they just assumed systems would fail and planned accordingly. Subtlety, discretion, and adaptability, those were the real defenses, not just locks and alarms. If you apply even just a few of these principles today, like hiding critical items in unexpected places, avoiding unnecessary displays of wealth, reinforcing from the inside, and controlling information, you'll significantly improve your home's resilience, all without drawing attention. These weren't paranoid measures, not at all. They were just practical responses to hard reality, refined over time by experience and necessity. If you found value in this breakdown and want more historically grounded survival knowledge that actually works, go ahead and subscribe to Battlefield of Survival. Share this with someone who takes preparedness seriously. History has already tested these methods and, they passed.